I'm Jack Freund. I'm the co-author of the book on FAIR and also the resident fellow of the FAIR Institute. And I have the distinct pleasure today to introduce to you Richard Barretto. He's the manager of security operations at Cimpress, where he's in charge of both the SOC and GRC teams. His main focus has been the delivery of SOC and GRC security services for Cimpress's 15 owned businesses. Prior to joining Cimpress, he worked in various leadership roles for different companies and industries. He's been a contributing member of the team helping to implement FAIR at Cimpress, which means this presentation is going to be really helpful to those that are looking to onboard FAIR into their organizations. He's been working in security for 20 years and is a CISP and CISA. Richard, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks. Thanks for having me and allowing me to give my presentation. Welcome everyone. Thanks for attending the FAIR Institute FairCon. This would be my third year. Unfortunately, it's my unfortunately we're not together in the big gigantic conference room, exchanging coffees and exchanging contact information. But hopefully in the future we can all be together in a room exchanging ideas. But I guess in this new world we have to live through virtual for the time being. So let me just share my presentation here. My name is Richard Barretto. I'm the manager of security operations, as Jack said. I've been at Cimpress for 5 years. I have a unique position where I get to manage both the GRC teams and the security operations center. So that gives me an interesting perspective of how risk and compliance also has a relationship to the security operations center. But I'm going to start off my talk with just talking about how Cimpress got introduced to FAIR and our journey and how that journey still continues. What's working for us and what doesn't work, or what are we still trying to think about as far as FAIR and also adopting NIST. How can FAIR work with NIST? So I'm going to also talk about I'll give you a prototype and a mapping and a model, what we envisioned and how that's working and how we're testing it. And then also, in addition to that, how can you prove your security value with these frameworks? I think as like any other organization or any security team, you're constantly trying to prove your value back to the organization. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. All right. Okay. So some of you may have seen this. Last year, Ian Amit, the Chief Security Officer, won the award around innovation for adopting both NIST and FAIR and mapping them. So here in this diagram, NIST CSF is one of the pillars for our strategy. FAIR is another pillar of our strategy, and then CIMS, which is our Cimpress Managed Security Services, which is basically an IT catalog of security services that we provide back to the business on a chargeback model. So in our beginning of our journey with FAIR and NIST, we started off specifically with NIST. We have 15. At the time we had 15 business units, and we needed to get a good scope and understanding of their maturity around security practices. So what better way is to pick and choose a framework like NIST that worked well with our organization. So we went through that survey, and then we then got a report of all the maturity levels for each of the businesses. Then we needed to get a better understanding what was the top risk that the business really cared most about. And so we introduced FAIR to our enterprise risk management group, and they quickly got drawn to it and said, yes, definitely, let's adopt FAIR, let's test it and see if it works. So we did, and we were very fortunate to be successful with that in our first year. So the methodology that we went through was some organizations go from a bottom up. We took a top down approach. So we met with the CEOs and the CFOs and executive staff for each of the businesses, and we asked them specifically, please tell us your top risks. It didn't necessarily have to be information security risk. We wanted to just know what's your top risk and understand what was top of mind for them. But then it ended up being that most of the risks that they were talking about were operational risks, which then easily can get converted into like um, an information security risk. So we went through that exercise, we were able to quantify and then be able to report the risks to the organization. And the managers or senior management really saw the value in it and told us to continue with using FAIR going forward. And then on top of that, once we went through the NIST and the CSF, and FAIR reviews, we obviously identified areas where the organizations may have been lacking in certain controls. So that's where CIMS came into play, and we provided those services for them. We curated the best of breed products because of our buying power and volume across 15 business units. We were able to get the best pricing. And so that was also the value that we provided back to the organization. So this is our now third year practicing NIST, CSF, FAIR, and into our SIM services that we provide back to our organization. Okay, let's see here. All right. Okay. Oops. So when we went through our, as we go through our journey, we were definitely coming through some hiccups and some roadblocks of some sort, challenging our thought process on how NIST and FAIR was gonna work. In our first iteration, we literally just took NIST controls and the maturity levels for each business and said, okay, how does this map to resistance strength? I mean, that's a pretty straightforward mapping from FAIR to NIST. But then we started to challenge ourselves because every risk scenario was different. So we needed to figure out a good way to map the NIST controls to resistance strength. So, for example, if you had a ransomware, ransomware, you'll probably need good access controls, good policies, maybe some antivirus or endpoint protection. But then you may not necessarily need all the other controls in NIST. And so we went through that process of mapping those out because we wanted to also give the business clarity on which controls matter the most to them based on their top risks. And this is one of the challenges that we went through. It's still a work in progress, and it continues to develop. But we're taking an iterative process to develop that. So in our models, when we first started off, you can easily do like a one-to-one mapping. So you could take a NIST control and map it directly to resistance strength, or you can take a one-to-many risk scenario and one-to-many NIST controls to a resistance strength or certain areas of the FAIR model. And I'll show here an example in just in a few seconds, but not everyone's going to have the same one-to-one relationship or one-to-many, because everyone's risk is going to be different, everyone's controls are going to be different. But I wanted to mention that because we realized that we couldn't come up with this holy grail of a model that anyone can use and scale out. We realized as we were going through the scenarios with each of our businesses that every business had different controls that needed to be mapped back to FAIR. All right, so here's just, and this is just for illustrative purposes, but the risk scenario was malware for one of our businesses. They were concerned about like a ransomware or a virus being released in their environment. Then we had to identify what are the mitigating controls that needed to be in place for malware. So for like a high level, like good Active Directory configurations, having antivirus. So at a high level, those were the mitigations. And once we have identified those mitigations, you start to now easily tie back to NIST CSF controls. So it can be access controls, it could be detective controls or protective controls. And so that's kind of the process that we went through in order to map both the NIST and the FAIR framework. Okay. Here, so if you guys are, hopefully you're familiar with this, but for those who are new to FAIR, this is the FAIR FAIR framework and the ontology. So you have your loss event frequency and loss magnitude. And so again, I was talking about resistance strength because that's revolved around the controls to prevent vulnerabilities. And what we did was we came up with just kind of a model to figure out, okay, so if you had a control and it was a maturity average or a maturity score of repeatable or ad hoc, it gave a certain resistance strength. Now, every organization, I have to say, will have different resistance strengths, but this is something that we came up as just like a starting point for us to start with and use as we were going through our exercises. So here is just we map, just showing we map vulnerability management to resistance strength. That's a pretty straightforward example. And then because someone scored at a repeatable or a managed, you can tie that back, the ranges back to the resistance strength. But then there's the model of one-to-many, right? So you have maybe one control or one risk that maps to many controls. And the approach that we took, it's just an easy one, is you have to identify the controls again for all the controls for that specific risk scenario. And then we just took the average of those controls. And here, just for illustrative purposes, we said, okay, yeah, here's a control average of 2.44. It's kind of in between 2 and 3, but we're more comfortable with it being at repeatable. So the resistance strength is going to get a 50 to 79%. Okay, all right. Move the arrows. All right. So the journey still continues for us. We are continuing to try to refine this process with mapping NIST, CSF, and FAIR. But in reality, like with any good security program, you need to also validate your program. So the proof is always in the pudding. And what we went through, we used a firm to go through a red team test. So if those who are not familiar with a red team test is not a penetration test. A red team test is not a vulnerability scan. It is a complete adversarial simulation of what a hacker would do if they were truly targeting our organization. So the only information that the red team organization or team testers had about our organization was just basically the logo and the name of our company. We didn't give them any network information or IP addresses. That's something that they all had to do in order to conduct their test. And then as soon as we went through that test and humbled, especially by that test, we then realized that we had to track the results of that test. And you could track the results of the test, right? Like you can track, how well you did in these controls. But the one thing that it didn't give us, it didn't give us clarity for our SOC on how to detect and alert around those specific attacks. And so, yep. Sorry, going back here. Oops. Yep, there's something wrong with my slide, but we adopted the MITRE attack framework. So if those who are not familiar with the MITRE attack framework, the MITRE attack framework is a catalog of tactics, techniques that were observed from real attacks. They're contributors from the community that provided the list of tactics and techniques. And I can show you here. Here's the MITRE attack framework. We also created a heat map around the MITRE attack framework after a red team test because we wanted to know how well we were doing as an organization to, one, did we detect those specific tactics and techniques? And also, did we have any blind spots? So like here, here in this chart, green is that we tested it. That was a technique that was used during the red team test. But then the red shows also the areas that either that was tested, but also it was a blind spot for us that we definitely needed either better controls around or we needed better alerts and detections for that. Here, just kind of going back to the MITRE, back to the NIST CSF. we tried to do is map protect to resistance strength, detect to resistance strength. But then after a red team test, we also started to realize that detect and respond, right? So the detection controls and the response controls could also potentially map back to the loss of magnitude. Now, this is something that we're still testing, and this is very theoretical at the moment, but it's something that we're toying around with, and I'll show you in a second here how that would work. Right, if I can just get all these arrows. Okay, so during our red team test, what was very important for us to measure was our mean time to detect. So mean time to detect was the time that the attack happened to the point that our alert system started to sound off, and also the mean time to contain, right? So as soon as we found the attackers were on our network or on our systems, how quickly we were able to contain them, stop them, and also eradicate the issue or get them off our system so that we basically stave or protect ourselves from a potential attack or any loss of information. So the theory behind here is what we've came up with is that if you track the mean time to detection and contain, that you can potentially reduce the amount of magnitude, right? So like here is less than 1 hour, you can reduce your loss magnitude by 10%, or you can reduce your magnitude by 47% if you reduced your mean time detection and it was less than 2 hours. So this is, again, this is something that we're playing with, but you know, we think that there's definitely some goodness here that we can use in the future, and we're continually trying to evolve this this theory. So just to kind of share some of the metrics that we track and for any incident that we have, or not even incident, but for any of our operational stuff, these are just kind of like our KPIs is mean time to retrieve a log for an investigation. Sometimes we may not have the logs to a specific log source that's related to a specific attack. Sometimes we also need to mean time to get detections, because detections is as good as you configuring your systems to find those particular attacks. Others was just, you know, easy ones are like mean time to response. So once we found the incident, how quickly did we respond and contain those particular attacks? So those were key metrics for us to measure as we, you know, as we go through our journey, or as we work through our security operations center. So I wanted to use this slide here kind of to tie everything. So what is FAIR, NIST, MITRE, and how does it all fit together? So like I said in the beginning, in our organization, we started with NIST. We wanted to know the maturity of our organization and the security practices, right, so that we could get a good understanding of how well they did and what we needed to invest in or ask support around. FAIR gave us the top business risk that was top of mind for the organization, and also gave us the risk tolerance, right? So now in that conversation, you can talk about dollars and an investment, and it was easy to talk about how you can reduce the risk in terms of dollars, and then mapping it back to NIST controls. But then now with the MITRE attack framework, that gives us the specific alerts and detections and techniques that an attacker would go through for these top loss scenarios. So from a top level down, right? So what does this mean? From a top level down, you have your controls that map to your top risks, right? So we know those set of controls that we got to focus on, but now we also have the alerts and detections that we also need to elevate or escalate because they are already tied back to the top risks. And the good part about this too is now we have dollars. So if we ever needed, if we ever needed to ask our management for investments, we can easily tie back the controls, the detections, back to those top risks. And then it was also important too, because a lot of feedback I got from my team was, you know, we're doing all this great work around alerts and detections. We get a lot of alerts, and but how does that tie back to the business? What value does that bring back to the business? And that's where this melding the three frameworks allowed us to do that, is now you have the alerts and detections that tie back to the specific controls that tie specifically back to the top business risks in the organization. All right, and so here, I'll just end with this. After all this work, it really gave us the results of and clarity around our top risks, the controls and posture of our controls, and also the areas that we needed to improve for alerts and detections. It gave us a clear roadmap of which controls we needed to focus on as far as investment, fine tuning, and things like that. And then just in general, it gave us end-to-end picture of our security program from, at the very low level of of an attack or even configurations all the way to the top. And then after that's all said and done, this is not easy work. We have to take breaks once in a while and sometimes enjoy a beer to enjoy the fruits of our labor. And so that is the end of my presentation. I appreciate your time and hopefully you found this interesting. If you ever have any questions or if you wanted any ideas that you want to share with us, I'd be happy to take your inquiries. So you can reach me on LinkedIn. You can easily find me there, or you can just email security@cimpress.com, and I'm sure someone will be able to reach back to you. But again, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the FAIR Institute allowing me to give you this presentation.
Thank you, Richard. That was very interesting, and I like how you connected the different frameworks. Having spent some time with those frameworks, it's interesting to see what you did there. Did you find, I always find, especially at that lower level, that there's a lot of overlap between the different T&Ts at the attack level and the ones you might see at the top? Was that a problem? How did you manage that, or any sort of stories you have about how you worked that through the process, and especially got the people in your SOC used to thinking about grouping attacks like that?
Yeah, it's tough. So it's still an exercise. So again, it's still a work in progress. We're taking it through a process. We're still building that catalog. So the problem I had with the MITRE attack framework was mapping the specific tactic and technique to the scenario. And that's where the key for the NIST CSF was for us, because you can easily take like the risk scenario and say, okay, what are the high level mitigations? So you take those mitigations, like, okay, great, I got those mitigations, like data backup, and I can easily map those to the NIST CSF controls. But the nice part about MITRE has done some really excellent work, and they're continuing to evolve. But now they've started to do, you can see also on their website, they've mapped their techniques to specific mitigations. Now, because I have those high level mitigations, I can map those techniques to the NIST controls and back specifically to the tactics.
Interesting. Have you, with regards to some of the grouping and in the attack groups, MITRE thinks of those very differently than we do with FAIR. Have you given any thought, or have you worked through sort of mapping, Charming Kitten or Dark Hotel or Dust Storm to some of the threat communities that we use in FAIR? Has that been useful for you, or has it just sort of not worked at this higher level in the organization?
No, we haven't. We're not there yet. But I'm in hopes that through this presentation, I'm also eventually going to post this publicly through my GitHub repo, or through an article that we get some ideas. I'm actually going to reach out to MITRE too, because I know they're doing a lot of work around trying to map specifically the tactics and techniques to the NIST CSF. But yeah, we're not there yet. It's still a work in progress.
So you again, your position is unique, that sort of straddling red team and then risk like that. Like, it's an interesting perspective. What have been some of the challenges that you've gone through in helping risk people think about security from an attack perspective, and helping attack professionals think about it from a risk perspective?
Yeah, I'm kind of like the bridge of that. The business doesn't, so, in all honesty, the business doesn't understand tactics and techniques. They do understand the red team test, right? So that was real for them. So when we went through the red team test, they had no knowledge that the red team test was happening. They actually thought it was a real breach. So that really provided weight. The business doesn't really get at that level. They just want to understand that their investment is giving them the return in value, right? They want to understand that they have the resources and that they're providing the right resources in time. But for the SOC, they really needed to understand what the top risks are, because if you ever worked in a SOC, you're not really focused on the business. You're just focused on, hey, we got this alert? Is this a true positive, false positive? Okay, is this is this a greater issue? Is it affecting the whole organization, or is it just affecting one user? They never really got at that level. And again, like I said, that the feedback was they never had transparency back to the risk. And what was all this hard work for, unless they knew exactly what those top risks were.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, it's a unique perspective. And I think going forward, people that want to work in risk and in many cases, all the security functions are going to have to think about what they do in terms of business outputs more and more. And I think FAIR gives you a lot of opportunity to express and think about that way. So
yeah, I mean, we're not there yet, but I imagine at some point in time, the business is going to say, well, how soon are you going to get, how quickly did you get an alert on that specific attack for this top risk? We're not there yet, but I imagine we're going to get there very soon.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Your presentation today was very insightful.
Okay. Thank you for the time, and be well.